today I'm going to give you a list of the things that you need for this quilt project. One is fabric for the quilt top. And what I'm planning to use is part of my stash. If you see these big tubs over here behind me, I have about 8 that are full of quilting fabric that I've been collecting over the year, or that have accumulated anyway, whether I've tried to collect them or not. But that is the purpose for this project. I want to use up some of my stash. So I have a lot of real pretty prints that I'm going to try to match up with some solids and make my squares for my 9-patch. Okay, so we need fabric for the top. We need batting. And I've just bought this batting, this roll of batting yesterday. They're so bulky, I don't keep a lot on hand normally. You need fabric for the lining, and I'm planning to use a white broadcloth fabric for my lining. Okay. Then we need a sewing machine. Now it doesn't have to be a big fancy sewing machine. I bought mine, I think it was about $350. This was about 10 years ago. And I wanted a new sewing machine. I had been sewing on an antique Singer sewing machine that didn't even do a reverse stitch. It's just the forward stitch only, but it made a beautiful stitch, and I made lots of quilts on that sewing machine. So I decided to get a new sewing machine, and I got a Brother. But it is made specifically for quilting and embroidery. And I am not recommending that you get a special type of sewing machine. Any sewing machine, they have some now at the fabric stores for as low as $50 or $60 that work perfectly well. So as long as it makes a good stitch, it is a good sewing machine. So you need a sewing machine unless you're going to do everything by hand. You also need thread. And what you need is my mother always used a quilting thread, or something called dual duty. And I actually prefer the dual duty, I think, but the quilting thread is really good. Let me show you some of mine. I like the Coats and Clark thread, and it's very affordable, and it comes in all sorts of colors, beautiful colors. But this is a Coats and Clark. It's a lavender color, and it's a dual duty. And this is a Coats and Clark, but it is not dual duty. It's just all purpose. And here's another Coats and Clark, but it is an art thread. So there's all sorts of threads out there, and you'll just have to try several to see what you prefer, but I would recommend that you start with their dual duty or quilting thread. You will need scissors. Now for years, many years, I used the scissors to cut out my quilt squares for everything. But if you happen to have the rotary cutter, then they work very well. And they speed up the process, but you do not have to have these. You can cut out all your squares and do everything you need to do with a good pair of scissors, but it needs to be a good pair of scissors. And I like the Fiskars. One thing you need to keep in mind about your quilting scissors, if you're going to use them for quilting, don't let anybody else use them for anything like cutting paper or anything else in the house. Use them only for fabric, because they get dull very quickly and you need sharp scissors. But now if you do use the rotary cutter, you will need a quilting mat, a self-healing quilting mat, and they come in different sizes. Mine is a 24 by 36. That way you can work with a bigger piece of fabric. Then you need rulers, and I have several. This is my favorite. This one is 12 by 12. And I have several different sizes. I always keep a yardstick. That comes in handy. And I also have a T-square that I swiped from my husband's shop, the place where he keeps all his tools. But I occasionally get into a situation where I need to square the corners of a quilt, and I use that T-square. Now, for many years, I didn't have those rulers. All I had was the 12-inch, just regular school ruler. And what I did was, I would get pieces of thick cardboard, like you find in packages, you know, when you buy something, there might be a thick piece of cardboard in it, or the back of a legal pad. I would take that heavy cardboard and make my own ruler or something to cut my squares by. I'd cut them whatever size I wanted. Now, that's not the ideal way to do it, because sometimes you don't cut them, they're not really square, and it kind of makes your quilt off a little bit. But that's what I did when I got started. I didn't have the money to go out and buy a bunch of tools for quilting, so I just used what I had. I substituted homemade things. But anyway, these, you can get a lot of nice rulers, and they're not expensive. But this one, I believe, is six inches. I usually use either 4 or 5 inch squares is what I prefer, but sometimes I do want to make a larger quilt, a queen or a king size, and I like to use larger squares in some of those. And in some cases, it's just time saving, because you don't have to cut as many squares out. The only other things you need are pins. You need straight pins. You need straight pins. And for different things, you might need some safety pins. But if you're going to quilt on your sewing machine, you will need quite a few. And I get the large. The large safety pins. You see how they're a little, they're curved a little, and it makes going through 2 or 3 pieces of fabric and back up easier, the way they're shaped. But these are really handy. Regular safety pins will work, but these, made specifically for quilting, are much easier to work with. So I keep a large amount of those. And then you'll need, if we're going to quilt on the sewing machine, you'll still need some some needles for hand sewing, because you will may want to hem your quilt by hand. That's what I always do. I rarely use a sewing machine to hem my quilts. The hand stitching on the quilting just adds a nice little touch. So you'll need some needles, and we've already talked about the thread, and you will need an iron and ironing board, just a regular, whatever you happen to have, ironing board, because you need your fabric to be pressed before you start working with it. And you need your pattern. Okay, so between now and next week, if you will decide what size quilt you're going to make, then we'll talk about how much fabric you need for the size quilt that you're going to be working on. Thanks for stopping by.